Welcome to Democracy Nerd. Here we are on the side of people and purpose in an era where more and more is controlled by money and robots. The intersection of technology and democracy. Where's our hope? Is Cambridge Analytica the tool of our demise, or is the technological advancement of the Barack Obama campaign the salvation to allow people to connect more authentically and to build modern age movements that might even be able to grow grassroots power beyond the capacity of just hub and spoke TV ads and mail pieces? How should we be thinking about the intersection of technology and democracy? Joining us now is somebody who might be able to help us. Matt Krayton, founder and principal of Publitics, which helps navigate the intersection between politics and emerging technology for his clients. Let's start with an introduction. First of all, thank you, Matt, for joining us. And how did you get into this mess?
Thank you. Get into this mess. Thank you. Thank you for having me. So it's a little bit of a roundabout story, but I joke that it's a very typical millennial kind of story. So I initially went to school thinking I was going to be a teacher, secondary ed, history, civics, social studies, all that good stuff. So did my undergrad history, political science minor, got a master's degree in education, did the whole thing. Economy crashed in 2008. They had the financial meltdown. I don't there have been so many crises in between here and there. It's like, oh yeah, I remember that one. But yeah, so that was a little tough and created a situation where there weren't that many jobs. So I decided, you know what, let's take whatever job I can get. But while I was there, I was like, yeah, I've always been kind of interested in politics and did some work in grad school at a public opinion polling institute. So I was like, all right, let's try to get into politics. So the sort of short version to this is I was poking around trying to find a couple of campaigns to work on at that point, just starting out after deciding that I was going to be a political consultant, which seems insane. But ultimately, I found two campaigns that were willing to hire me at that point with zero experience. And the reason that they hired me was, I had thought, what thing will a campaign trust a young person to do without any experience? I was like, digital media, let's do this, like social media. So I was
Look
like,
for
all
the
right,
nearest young person with a computer and say, that person probably can be useful.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. So instant credibility. So that was sort of so that was 2012, 2011 into 2012. And that was right after, the Obama reelect. So technology was on everyone's mind at that point. And the other sort of thing that I tried to do was like, all right, let's find some campaigns that are probably going to be sure losers, because, there's no campaign that is one of the targeted races, nationwide is ever going to hire me. So let's just find someone that's willing to take a chance. So I did,
corporate world, by the way, in the corporate world, they call that innovating at the fringe, right? It's hard to put your, all of the budget, all the credibility, all the brand, all the decision-making, all of the careers on the bet of a brand new thing. But if you do it over in a Skunk Works off to the corner, maybe you can do it. Keep going. Thanks.
Oh, exactly. 100%. Yeah. So that was the beauty of actually that campaign. So the interesting thing is one of them was a congressional race. I won't name names, but being a campaign that was sure to lose, fundraising was a bit of a challenge, right? Like the national money just was not available. This is again pre-Trump, so there wasn't a ton of grassroots money coming into these sort of fringy kind of races. So we were able to do a fair amount on social media because, you couldn't go up on TV. You couldn't really do that much direct mail. So social was where it was at. It was still very inexpensive at that point. And we got to try some different things to see what worked and what didn't. So I was learning along the way, but that's really sort of how I got into this mess of politics and technology. And then from there, continued to consult on campaigns, doing everything from management to the digital piece, direct mail, TV. So we're pretty much a full service shop now, but very much started in digital media and have kind of stuck around that space as it's grown its sort of share of voice as a way of communicating with voters.
So what's the garden variety problem that Publitics solves? What, when a client comes to you and say, please do blank, do you just say, hey, we're going to set you up Facebook pages, we're going to build you sort of analytics to help you do better market targeting, we're going to even go beyond that and do sort of, I don't know, maybe new machine learning models, which we want to get into because I'm sure it's a hot topic in your email feed. What's the kind of thing that gets presented to you that you got to work on?
Sure. Yeah, it depends on the client. So, like, if we're talking about our political clients, it's very much helping them figure out like what media mix is going to work for them, given the electorate and budget. And then we sort of work backwards from there, developing out message platforms, deciding where to allocate spend, how to allocate those spends, and then working through the analytics to see what is working, what isn't working, and then building out models in some cases to help track voter opinion. Again, like, so it's interesting as sort of an aside on that piece, the modeling and machine learning, it's come a long way, but it's still not perfect. So I'm very much a believer in you kind of need to be omni-channel and kind of agnostic to and to get in agnostic in terms of getting to the truth of a race ultimately. So we really do try to help campaigns, hone in on message first, strategy, and then, building out those platforms on digital, and then pairing that with, direct mail or out of home in some cases, or television advertising. On the other side of the coin, we've also had the benefit of working with a couple of technology firms that are trying to get into politics. So in those cases, we really try to help those clients navigate the very specific, peculiar world of political campaigns and political advocacy, because it's not the same thing as. There's some similarities, corporate marketing and corporate communications and things like that, but there are some differences as well, and that's really where we try to help our clients navigate those spaces and kind of understand who they're talking to.
One thing that just came up in a meeting I was in, I know when I was really active in campaigns for, a decade plus, one of the things that frustrated me was how hard it was to dedicate financial campaign resource to things other than just the dominant form of media, which tended to be either TV or mail. And an old, maybe the founder, I'm forgetting his name, of modern political consulting, had a theory, had a principle, had a rule, which is you win a campaign by dominating the dominant form of media in a campaign. And in a congressional race, that was deemed to be television. In a legislative race, that was deemed to be mail. In a mayoral race and a presidential race, it was actually deemed to be word of mouth. Media has changed. And so I've sort of wondered about how that advice might have changed, and then also how that translates to budget. So in the past, if you could, trim off 5% of the campaign budget to do some Facebook ads, et cetera, right? That'd be a relatively robust social media campaign. I was just in a meeting when somebody was saying, well, no, I think it ought to be at least half on social media advertising. And I was wondering, as somebody who's in the deal flow, what is the share now? Have you seen that change? And percentages are useful to, I know it'd be round numbers, but help us understand how people are spending the resources and how that expenditure has changed.
Sure. Where we're sitting today is very different than where we were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, even when digital media was still very much a part of the conversation, but was early on in sort of the life cycle. So today we are staring down the barrel of an extraordinarily fragmented media landscape. So what is the dominant form of media in this country? The answer is nothing. In my view, right? Nothing. There isn't a single platform, now some have broader audiences than others, but even those, right, the Facebooks of the world have seen declining engagement over the years, right? Declining engagement both on Facebook proper and then Instagram and some of the messaging apps that are a part of the ecosystem. We've seen the rise of TikTok, right, for younger voters, younger audiences, and that audience continues to get a little bit older, as we move along. Broadcast news, right, still very useful. There's still a significant audience there, but I would not say that that's the dominant audience, right? Cable news, right, has an audience, but it's not the dominant audience. So the big question that I think a lot of campaigns are kind of struggling with today is like, do we want to find out what happens when we don't do some more of the legacy type media, right? Direct mail and the broadcast ads and television ads, right? If we have the budget to do those things, like, do we want to find out like what happens there?
So that's a really huge takeaway, right? If for, let's call it half a century, right? This idea of dominating the dominant form of media was the way that many strategic campaigns, maybe a majority of, certainly a plurality of winning campaigns, thought about things. And what you just said is, yeah, it doesn't make sense anymore, because there isn't that thing, unless maybe we create a category, call that the dominant form of media, and then sort of dominate that. And maybe that's the omnimedia landscape, and then we dominate the omnimedia landscape. So what you just said is, either we significantly change our definition of media and that principle still holds, or we have a new principle. And I want to dig into what that means for political strategy, but I want to, before getting into that, so keep that in your mind and be ready to knock that out of the park. But before that, how do you, just in terms of the budget, how are people spending their money now in different ways than they were spending their money 10 years ago?
Yeah, so I mean, there's definitely a lot more going onto digital. So and by that I mean like any digital platform out there. So whether that's social media, display advertising, I would even lump in like those crazy text messages that that you get, or the email fundraising that sort of hair on fire. We're packing our bags and going home. If you don't give us $10 right now, type emails. Those again were very effective for a while and are still somewhat effective, but I mean, you're starting to see a little bit of desensitization to those sorts of things. But I would say that in a typical, let's say like congressional race, you still see a large portion of the budget being spent on television, broadcast, and especially in the more expensive media markets, where just by virtue of being in an expensive media market, you're going to have to pay a premium for the same amount of spots that you would get in a less expensive media market. So like I'm sitting in the New York media market right now, one of the most expensive media markets in the country. Your money does not go a very long way on broadcast TV. So it costs, it will eat up a significant portion of your budget. So I would say TV is still big. Direct mail is right in there with digital. So I would say, if you're talking about TV, you're looking at somewhere in the range of like, 50% of your budget is most likely going to go on TV. And then, anywhere from, 25 and 25, I'm talking strictly media budget, excluding staff and field and all of these other things that you would do on a campaign, 25 and 25 on digital or direct mail, or some reshuffling in there overall. I mean, that's really like broad strokes.
No, that's what I was looking for. That's really helpful. And then to the principle, how do you describe who wins a campaign?
Sure. So it's kind of a different story now, and it really depends on the race that we're talking about. So the electorate has become so polarized at this point that in terms of pure persuasion, from a pure persuasion point of view, post 2016, I'm talking. So like, after kind of the realignment, or at least what I would call like a fragile realignment of voters that may have voted Republican previously, for like moderate Republicans, especially in some of these like Northeastern or coastal type states, that are now voting for Democrats, right? Sort of woke up after 2016, didn't like what Trump was selling. So you have these sort of affluent, educated voters, college educated women, voting in a different way. So post 2016 fragile realignment, you're really looking at a very small then portion of the electorate that is genuinely persuadable. So in terms of winning, and by persuadable, I mean persuading someone who's not sold on your viewpoint or your candidate to vote for your candidate, right? And that's low single digits at this point. So you kind of have to win the conversation there while also persuading your base to turn out in a lot of these races too. So it does come down to turnout, making sure that people aren't feeling too apathetic. People that you need in your coalition aren't feeling too apathetic to come out and vote. So I would say like it's really sort of a two-pronged thing, right? Like winning the overall conversation of a race. So like dominating the conversation from point A to point B, and litigating that race on your terms as a candidate, but then also figuring out how to motivate people to come out and vote for you ultimately, because like you can have the most persuasive message in the world, and if you poll people and ask them what their position on your positions are, they could be a majority with you, but if they don't come vote, it's not going to matter. So I think like that's a bigger piece of it too, is making sure that you're mobilizing these different, often disparate pieces of your coalition to come out and vote. So it's not your traditional base, but like again, college educated women, affluent suburban educated folks, younger voters, right? It's a pretty broad, diverse coalition that you have to. So I would say in terms of winning a campaign, you got to figure out how to reach those people and talk to those people and what messages and strategies are going to drag them out and get them to the polls, and then ultimately persuade that small group in the middle to swing your way.
How effective is, and do we have any controlled experiments, published or otherwise, to help us to instruct this? How effective is digital communications, or are digital communications, in turning voters out? What I heard you say is that another sort of competing aphorism is, well, it's the campaign who motivates the most voters and turns the most out to win. And it's a persuasion and a mobilization sort of turnout game. And then there's sort of a true or false debate about which sort of thing it is. And where I end up, for what it's worth in that debate, is, to me, some of the best mobilization is in fact persuasion. And one of the best ways, in fact, to persuade is to get more people communicating. And so if what it feels like you're doing sometimes is preaching to the choir, the reason you're doing that is to get your choir to sing, but you're hoping they're also singing to more and more out, sort of externally concentric circles. And in looking at the sort of older data, when it was Notre Dame and Yale did their studies on voter turnout. And by the way, thanks to Democracy Nerd listeners, we're going to be a little more political nerd today. And that the study showed that mail and TV ads had negligible impacts on voter turnout, but that phone calls had some impact, and knocking on doors had more measurable, more meaningful impact. I haven't seen more recent studies, and all of that was those are early days before more than half of the world seemed to have Facebook, and a significant percentage had Twitter, and whatever the heck its name is now. I know what its name is now. And so I wonder if there's been a catch up of the scholarship on how digital media impacts voting behavior, not just how people vote, but if they vote.
Yeah, I mean that's so I do think that, I mean, there has been a little bit of catch up, but then still a lot of open questions about what exactly works. And I think part of the difficulty that we run into, even when we're trying to run our own kind of experiments or like A/B testing things, is that like the world that we live in now is so noisy that it's hard to control for all of the other things that are going on at any given moment, and all of the other things that are demanding your attention as a voter in any given moment. So I think that it poses some very real challenges. What we have seen is like there are aspects of digital ads and digital communication that do help drive turnout, particularly if we're talking about relational organizing, and I can get into that a little bit. So it's basically activating your supporters then to reach out to their own personal networks, whether it's family, friends, others that they're neighbors that they're close with, and getting them to do something online in order to encourage those people to vote, whether that's sending a text through an app, or sending a personalized email to those people, or even sharing different content on their preferred social media platform. So I think there is an effect there. It's very hard to measure. I haven't seen anything, and it may be there may be something out there, but I haven't seen anything that is super conclusive. But I will say that like in terms of driving turnout in an election, I think one big piece of it is making sure that people know that there's an election in any given year. Now in a presidential race, that's a much different story, because like you're almost pretty much maxed out at the number of people who know that it's going on. Like It gets harder and harder, in a presidential year to find someone who would say, "Oh, I didn't know there was a race this year." Whereas like in a year, so New Jersey is interesting. So I'm in New Jersey. We do a lot of work here as well as nationwide. But like New Jersey, we have an election every single year. This year we have an election. Our entire state legislature is up, and it's kind of a quirk of a post census thing where they put the Senate and the Assembly all in the ballot. But 2019, I guess, was the last time. So this year is going to be an off year election where a lot of people have no idea. They're already thinking about next year. So in that sense, if you're trying to turn people out in an off cycle election, I think there is a lot of value in simply just communicating the fact that there is an election, right? So the more aware people are that there is an election, you're going to capture some percentage of people who would vote if they knew there was an election, right? So I'm not talking about like the subset of the electorate that really takes some arm twisting or convincing to get out and vote. But I'm saying that next tranche of people who maybe they vote in midterms, but they forget about like your, random legislative year or whatever it is, or Supreme Court or court or judge elections in some of these other states. So it's kind of an interesting thing. So I think like it depends on the election. In a presidential year, much harder to tell. I think whether digital media in particular drives turnouts specifically. And I think you have to get pretty granular to try to figure out exactly what's going to work in that year. Whereas like, I think in general, in off year elections, just that awareness that there is in fact an election is useful in turning out some percentage of extra voters than if you did nothing at all.
So that, and I mean, this is no knock. That was a lot of words to say. We're not sure yet. We think it has an impact, and we're not sure exactly how much impact. What are you sure of? What are the ways you think digital media, where you think, and we don't have to limit it to digital media if when you say emerging technology, you mean something beyond merely digital media. But what does it do? What are you confident that it does? Or what can we prove that it does?
Sure. Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think, just to kind of on the philosophical side of this, right? There's this resistance to in this business, right? Politics sometimes to say out loud that like there are things that we do not know about, right? And I think it's important to talk about the stuff that we don't know specifically about. Like if there's a lot of noise in the data.
I want to dwell on that for a moment. Do you mind if I dwell on that for a moment?
Yeah,
it's really important dynamic. So because I think you're totally right. If you go to a political consultant and ask a question and they say, I don't know, it's sort of counter the culture. And most of the media people, most of the marketing people, including some high level people that I would meet with, I so seldom heard people say, I don't know. And I've thought about why. I then had a meeting that was, it was for a nonprofit effort, for a sort of movement building effort, and had somebody who was a creative director at a major marketing firm and sort of nationally very prestigious advertising firm. And this person was not in charge of the meeting, but kind of in charge of the meeting. And somebody asked them a question and he just said, I don't know. And I was floored. It didn't make me like the guy less. It didn't make me trust the guy less. I just hadn't anticipated. I'd experienced that in my lifetime. All of us have said the words before, but I hadn't anticipated it in that context where a person who was kind of supposed to be running a group of people in a direction towards, sort of a campaign strategy of some sort. And it was not an electoral campaign, but had some overlap. I was unfamiliar with that level of, kind of answer humility. And I've wondered why. I want to get your impression, but I'm going to offer a hypothesis. And I think it is that if somebody says, I don't know in a political meeting, that afterwards, the political culture will say, I told you, that person doesn't know stuff. I know stuff. That the very nature of it being a fight, that it being not more of a zero-sum game marketing culture means that people are less honest, that it creates a dynamic of vulnerability as weakness. Donald Trump is maybe an example of vulnerability being weakness. But these aren't even thoughts I've shared out loud before. So they're certainly not tested or evaluated or scrutinized. Shoot down anything I just said or give a better answer or amplify anything that makes sense.
I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, if I could boil it down to one sentence, it's bad for business. Yeah. I mean, that's I think what it boils down to is it's bad for business. I think that there is a premium put on being right in this business. And we have a little saying around the office, right? And I really try to live up to this, if we can, with our team, internally, and on the campaigns that we work with too. We try to impress this value, but it's like, it's not about being right. It's about getting to the right answer. For me, at least. Like, I think that's a really important thing, because like, you're not serving your client if you are not willing to look under every stone, try to figure out what the actual answer is. And like, the reality is, like, sometimes you just don't know, like, specifically what thing contributed to it, right? So like, sometimes you will be in a situation, like in a campaign, where it's a death by 1,000 cuts, and you cannot figure out which cut was the thing that killed you. Like, it's just, there are just so many of them that you can't point to this, like, maybe we should have run more ads on Facebook or Instagram versus, like, we were getting killed with like some negative, like a couple of successive negative news cycles at a really bad time in the campaign, maybe toward the end, like the October surprise. Maybe it's that, some sort of broader shift happened, economically speaking, like that, you had no control over, but you're kind of in the middle of it, right, trying to communicate through these very tough issues, or even like personality traits as a candidate. So I think that's the issue, is like, if you walked in these meetings and you say like, well, we actually don't know what contributed to the win here, it's not great for business. But I think the flip really should be true, is like, you should really be looking for consultants out there who are willing to say like, we're not sure right now exactly what it is that's happening here, but we need to get to the bottom of it, or at least get to as close to the bottom of it as you can. And we really try to do that, I think.
And that's where good science starts, right? If we're actually applying analytics, we're applying our sort of technology mind, or sort of getting to the answer mind. That's where it starts. It starts with hypotheses, not certainty. It doesn't start with faith. It starts with curiosity.
Right. I mean, like, without humility and curiosity, right? And I think that's a really good point, or word, because I use it a lot too. It's like, we need to be curious about everything around us. Like, we need to constantly be questioning. And like, you see these races where you have, you have some situation where you have a model, for example, right? Like, the data team builds out, models, and they're saying, oh, you're up by like, 10 points or whatever, but like, something else is off, right? So then you kind of go back to the gut, right? Like, you have people who've been around. So I do not like to discount gut either necessarily, right? Because these models are not perfect either. I mean, they're only as good as the inputs, right? Like, what people are telling you about their opinion on various issues. So you need to have the humility to say, okay, well, like, I trust these models. I believe in modeling. I believe in analytics. I believe in the data. I believe in the process. But let's just double check this, because like, we have someone here who's spent like a lot of time in this particular community, and they just feel like something is wrong. So like, let's just have some humility here and say like, let's check on it. Let's see what's going on. The flip could be true too. These sort of gut feeling folks will come and say, oh, the models are wrong, but you're pretty sure the models are right. I think that humility and curiosity is important, and that you always have to check your own work, as you're going along, and it's not easy to communicate that in a way, as a consultant, that is always super attractive in a meeting, a way that like,
No, I get it.
like,
I get it.
and presented,
Getting
even
rewarded for humility over time, right? If you have a chance to build, an organization over time, but so much success is dictated in 2 and 4 year cycles. And one of the oldest dynamics there is a political consultant who surprisingly wins one race, is proclaimed a genius, and then runs the next one, and maybe doesn't win and is no longer a genius. And maybe it's because they were dumb the second time and smart the first time. Maybe it was a little bit of luck both times. And ultimately, this is a complex dynamic system. It is predicting the weather. The best prediction of the weather is yesterday's weather. And the only one better than that is the weather right now or an hour ago. And that doesn't mean there aren't tools to predict the weather, but it's kind of hard. I do want to get to something different than the weather, which is artificial intelligence. Mm-hmm. So you are, I think, on the record, I think not secret about your concern that AI is going to be or at least meaningful risks that it's going to be detrimental into the upcoming. It's going to matter. And it's going to be detrimental to democracy and detrimental to upcoming elections. I don't think I have to make that case too strongly, at least because I want you to make that case.
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, it definitely could be problematic. And there are a number of ways in which it certainly could be problematic. So the most obvious use case, if you're trying to be sort of a bad actor in this space, is generative AI, and that's no secret, right? Like I think a lot of people have flipped through TikTok or Instagram, and you've heard um, various political figures' voices that saying stuff that they never said, mostly in a humorous way so far. But I mean, it's not too far off to think that that technology could be used for developing these deep fakes. Generative video is getting better, right? So where you're able to generate literal video that was never recorded, right? The AI pieces together information from previous videos and is able to generate essentially a brand new video of someone or something that resembles a candidate, or someone involved with the campaign, saying something, right? So that, I think that's a very obvious use case. The question is there enough awareness in the public at present of what those things are and what those things aren't, especially if they're presented to people as the truth, right? So like, and we haven't yet experienced this in a huge way, but I imagine that at some point during the 2024 cycle, we're going to see some sort of deep fake, some sort of whether it's audio or video, rear its head on social media and make the rounds. And so I think that is something that we absolutely have to be concerned about is how does AI enable a lot of the shenanigans that we've seen with doctoring of clips, right? So like, I mean, that's a practice as old as time, right? You take a clip and doctor it in a way that is take someone way out of context, so what they're saying doesn't really, the clip doesn't convey the meaning that they were trying to initially convey, or it's just some sort of like fumble or gaffe or something. So again, that like political consultants and campaigns have been doing that forever, but this is like a brand new way, potentially. Now, I don't want to give anyone any ideas about what to do here, but I'm sure that it's crossed the minds of folks who are thinking about doing harm with this technology. The good news is so far in that like it's getting better, but we're still sort of in that uncanny valley with the AI technology where it's like you can, like, if you take a beat, you can kind of tell the difference between things.
The uncanny valley, for the people who aren't science fiction nerds, is the place where it's something kind of looks real, but it looks just fake enough that it makes us feel weird. Right? It's something that looks really, really fake. It doesn't feel that weird. That looks really, really fake. But if it looks kind of real and kind of fake, it looks real. That's roughly right, right?
Yeah.
I will say, Albert Thomas, you talk about the being as old as time, just about the last, not quite the last, but I think the second to last member of the Democratic Party to serve in the U.S. Senate from Utah. This is a story I didn't know until recently, was the way he was defeated was by linking him to communism, and he was not a communist and he was not friendly to communists, but that was the campaign that got and helped tilt Utah politics. And they used a doctored photograph of Albert Thomas shaking hands with reaching out to shake hands with the head of the American Communist Party. And it was two different photographs in two different locations taken on different days. And they just put the photographs together. And this is, I think the 1950s, and it worked. That was before AI. Now imagine if you can get out of Uncanny Valley and you can actually make Albert Thomas look really real, and you can help the head of the American Communist Party look really real and actually make him shake hands. That could be dangerous. I think people get that. Feel free to say more about it. There's another one that I kind of want to get to, which is, well, actually, let me keep the aperture wide. What are other ways, not just sort of the deep fake scenario, what are other ways where machine learning, with more data feeding into it, with more processing speed, with more sort of expertise and sort of smarter algorithms, et cetera, will expose us to greater manipulation, where we're not sort of figuring out what people want and how we get there, but more and more is being done to control and manipulate what people want for the purposes of acquisition of power?
Yeah, absolutely. So the algorithms are already quite good at presenting us with content that it thinks that we want to see, right? So like on social media, right, you go through your feed, and a lot of that stuff is stuff that you want to see or that you have some degree of interest in. So I definitely do have a concern about, because like as human beings, right, we have all of these sort of cognitive shortcuts that we have to use in order to process the massive amounts of information that we're presented with every single day, whether it's I mean, by merely existing, right? Like processing, cars going by, noises that we're hearing, all of the stuff that's going on in the various screens that we have, right? So we have to use shortcuts. Otherwise, like our brain would not function. Like we would not be able to function, particularly in modern society, in a way that resembles how people generally function. So we have all these sort of like cognitive shortcuts, which are good in some ways, but then also bad, and can lead us down paths that aren't real, or trigger emotional responses to things, which then you kind of like whatever information you're being presented with imprints on you, and you kind of internalize those sorts of things. So the concern with AI is that it could potentially because there still is a little bit of trial and error. Like if you're a campaign and you're trying to develop a message that caters to a specific audience, or just generally the electorate, there's still a bit of trial and error in figuring out how to present that message in a way that is effective, that will prompt people to share that message with their networks, that will prompt engagement. So there's still a little bit of work, on the part of humans, right? We have to sit here and think about what those things might be, and then think about how to present that message, and think about the messenger and all of those different pieces. There is a concern that at some point AI, and it's not quite there yet, that generative AI may be able to streamline that process to the point where it just becomes so scalable that you can pump out like the exact emotionally manipulative thing that you need to in that moment in order to move the electorate one way or the other on some issue, or some portion of the electorate one way or the other. So I mean, it is a possibility that something like that happens. I do think that there is some desensitization again to certain pieces of technology. Like eventually, like there are diminishing returns. So it's like the first person to be able to figure something out like reaps the biggest reward. So for example, like the peer-to-peer texting, those create like all the text messages during, I mean, eventually like that has diminishing returns, or the first person who figured out how to write a cheeky subject line in an email for fundraising purposes, and throw in all sorts of like ugly yellow highlighting, and found out, oh wait, this is actually nicer, this works better than a nicer looking email. So like eventually like all of those things have diminishing returns. It's not clear to me that AI generated content that is very specifically targeted and in some way would have that diminishing return, but you can kind of hope that like people get hip to what it is they're being exposed to, rather than constant stream something that makes you angry, for example, right? Because anger is an activating emotion. It moves people to do something, whether it's vote or go to a protest or engage with the local elected official, or any elected official, really. So that is definitely a concern, that like you could scale the ability to just like figure out what buttons to push very quickly. Again, we're not there yet. Like there's still a huge gap, but it may not be far off either.
So where are you also consulting, not only on the political side, but also on the kind of company side? So there are apps out, right? There's ActiVote, I think ReleVote, Moxie, Votable, these kind of new, or at least newish voting apps that are supposed to help empower voters. Are you aware of any of those, or do you have any takeaways on them?
Yeah, I mean, there are whole ecosystems around politically focused apps, or apps that are not necessarily politically focused but have tried to get into the political space. So we haven't obviously consulted with any of the apps that you just mentioned, but they all have some function. Like if you read the description, it's like, oh, well, this sounds good, right? This will help you, this app will help you interface with your member of Congress more effectively, and you can see how they're voting and see all the, it'll increase transparency, and then you'll be able to shoot off an email very quickly to your member of Congress. Or This app will tell you everything you need to know about the candidates that are running in your local election and like what they stand for. So one side stands for this, the other side stands for that, and like that's great. So I think so there are a couple of different issues in the political space, like if you're an app. So number one is adoption, right? So like again, think about all of the attention that we have in a day, right? It's a finite resource, right? We only have so many hours in the day, and we can only be doing so many things at once, despite maybe some of our best effort to do 1,000 things at once. You can only do a couple of things really effectively at once. So, you have demands on your attention from social media platforms, stuff that's going on in your life, streaming. Like oftentimes we'll sit on the couch watching Netflix while actively scrolling through, our social media feeds. So that's a lot going on at once. The question is then, how can a political app or a civically focused app break into that mix of things that you're checking all the time when the incentive is pretty low, right? Because like most people in this country are not nearly as plugged into the political back and forth as you and I are. And that's just the reality. And you can't really expect people to be either. I mean, you would hope that there would be a broader sort of civic knowledge about what's going on, but the reality is, again, we all have a lot to worry about in our lives, and like how much
getting people to actually download the app, actually use the app, actually remember that that's what they're going to do, rather than just relying on the things that are already part of their kind of daily deal flow, is hard. And then you map that or sort of connect that to kind of the challenge of network externalities, that things work better if lots of people use them. That if you have a little bit of use by a few people, you might not even get meaningful influence of even the few people who are on it, right? It's the challenge of scale. That's why it's an advantage oligarchy has in technology. You just beat it with blunt force trauma, just flood the zone with resources, get a lot of people, just put a ton of money in marketing. The Barbie movie put $150 million into marketing, and all of a sudden then it starts to catch on and get viral, but it didn't get viral until you got the virus and $150 million worth of brains.
That's exactly right. Yeah, that's exactly right. So I mean, again, like they don't have the infinite piles of money to market these sorts of things, and also it's not like you can't get your fix of politics elsewhere in any given on any given day, right? Like you can open TikTok and check out political content. You can open up Instagram and you'll see political content. Facebook groups, right? Even your local Facebook group, you'll see some kind of political content in there. So it's not like people are missing that from their lives. But in terms of like the constructive engagement, the question is there like this big sort of demand in the market for more constructive engagement with politics? And I think in theory there is, right? Like if you ask most people, they say, oh, well, our political system isn't working particularly well. I feel like my voice isn't heard. Like we could do things better. And I think like as a notion, people agree with that. But then in terms of taking the steps to do whatever it is that needs to be done in order to facilitate that change, there's a much bigger hurdle there than I think people realize. So that's the issue with a lot of these political technology apps. That's not to say that they're bad apps or that people shouldn't try, but it's a very hard space to break into.
And we don't want to, we don't want to damn it with self-defeating prophecies, right? Like I would much rather have a purpose-driven, democracy-focused app rather than an app whose primary idea is to sort of extract economic value from me and get me to buy shirts that I don't really need, but I might be able to persuade it in a moment of weakness or strength to purchase. Before we wrap, let me ask this though. If you have one piece of advice, either for the activist or sort of consumer of political media, and or for the policymaker trying to shape the landscape so that the landscape is more prepared for the world that we are in or the world that we are entering, what might that piece or those pieces of advice be?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. So for activists, I would say number one, or just general consumers of sort of political content and information, and people that participate in the civic process, I would say like the biggest thing that you can do is take a beat when you see something online, in particular that looks like it might not be totally right, or it looks like it could be false. Like take a minute. Like if something makes you super angry, like take a minute and then try to figure out what it is about that thing that's making you angry, and then dig into it a little bit more. Do some more research and figure out like if if what you're seeing is disinformation or some framing that's not especially positive. And that will come in handy too as AI again becomes more prevalent, and people are able to put stuff out that is intentionally crafted to create angry reactions in people, and outrage and all of that, for activists. The other thing I would say for activists too is like, don't get discouraged. Like I think it can feel like the world is kind of caving in on us and like we're not making a lot of progress on things, but we are actually. I mean, we've made a ton of progress on different things, and that's because people came out and voted. And I think in terms of activism and communicating with fellow voters, like communicating agency is very important, right? Like it feels oftentimes like we don't have agency in our lives as voters. So like you have to go to those people and say like, look, you and I have power here. And here's what our power did the last time we came out and voted. So let's exercise that power again. It may not be perfect, but we did have power and we did make these meaningful changes, and you do have agency. And because we did this, right? It wasn't just one person, one candidate, whatever. It was like we did this. So I think communicating agency to the people around you is extraordinarily helpful too. And then that's especially important, again, given the torrent of information and different things that we see on these digital platforms every day, right? Like I think it's just important to communicate that piece. So yeah, that's what I would say to the activists. Great. Yeah, I mean it's a tough world. Yeah, it's hard to again, it's hard to keep perspective.
I think you're allowed to have an exclamation point on the end of that, right? Reminding people that ultimately these decisions are made by human beings, that human beings have influence and power, that they have greater power if they work together and if they have a clear sense of where they want to go, and not to lose hope and not to think the robots actually have to be in charge. At this point, the robots don't get to vote. So at this point, the human beings still get to be in charge. Reminding of that sounds like a wonderful reminder. I wanted to say, by the way, in the prep, I wanted to give say hi to Kahari Mosley. He's somebody that I think helped win, and somebody I've known, I knew 25 years ago when I was younger and better looking, 23 years ago. I want to say thank you to Matt Krayton, founder and principal of Publitics, the consulting firm. Thank you so much, Matt. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for being a democracy nerd.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Great. I hope we connect again.
All right. Sounds good.